Hey everyone, before you forget, please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe. If you aren't sure what comment to leave, just tell me what your favorite Star Wars character is. I can't stress enough how much these things help my channel to grow, and it only takes you a few moments, so please like, comment, and subscribe. Just so you know, this is an ongoing series, meaning there will be more parts to this series that will come out. As of now, it is not finished. If you have already seen parts 1 through 7 of this series, then you can skip forward to part 8, and the timestamp for that will be in the description of this video. Thank you for being here, and I hope you enjoy. Our story begins with Darth Vader waking up in a very different location than what he is accustomed to. He is in his old living quarters in the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. It was dark. Immediately, he can feel that his body is different. He does not feel his suit around him, and looks at his hands to see that they are both there, neither robotic. He assumes this is simply another one of his unceasing nightmares, where he would be in his younger self and imagine the things he would do differently, only to wake up and realize that the hell he is in is very much real. Such a cold realization had happened 1,000 times before, and he was certain this was nothing more than the same. He closed his eyes and tried to will himself awake, yet to no avail. As the time passed, nothing he tried would wake him from this nightmare. Yet this felt more real than any other dream he had ever had, with the exception of his dreams of visions of the future. Darth Vader was not content with believing for even a second this fantasy was real, no matter how convincing it was and how impossible it seemed to be to awake himself. He decided to close his eyes and try to sleep in this dream, certain he would awake in reality, or at least a different nightmare than this. Sure enough, Vader had a nightmare of his mother in danger, dying in that tent after being enslaved and tortured by the Tusken Raiders. It was the exact same premonition he had back when he was young, before it actually happened. He awoke once more, feeling no extreme emotional reaction to such a nightmare. One he had relived dozens of times, and long since become steeled against the pain of the grief, channeling it to fuel its dark prowess in the Force. Yet, he was once again in his room, at the Jedi Temple. Once more, he was in his young, undamaged body. Still determined that this was a facade, Vader tried to sleep once more. Yet each time he awoke, he was back in the same place. Darth Vader started to become suspicious. This was something different from a normal dream. He got up and decided to go for a walk through the temple. Everything was just as he remembered it. The Jedi Temple guard stood watch. Everything felt so real. Vader came to a balcony that opened into the fresh night air, and a full moon bathed him with its glow. He stared up at it. He could feel the coolness of the air on his skin, the sensation of a slight breeze. He looked up at the moon in contemplation, a cold glare of rage on his face. This was almost worse torture than reliving his mistakes. If anything was more painful than despair for Vader, it was hope, the smallest hope that he kept locked away in the deepest recesses of his being, hope of redemption. And that tiny flame of hope flickered ever so gently at the prospect of a second chance to do things differently. The rage within him grew and burned coldly, as he wondered why was he stuck in a nightmare like this for so long, and why his mind would torture him with such false hope that seemed so real. Was this the work of his master? Perhaps Sidious was testing his apprentice, toying with him, trying to teach him another lesson by forcing him into such a vision. Or perhaps the Force itself was giving Vader some sort of prolonged vision. But Vader was determined to not humor either of those two parties by giving in to their tactics. He gained composure and calmed his rage, his expression becoming more stoic. Lord Vader would not allow himself the indignity of trying desperately to wake himself from this nightmare anymore after having tried so many times and failing. Whatever this nightmare was, whatever this facade was, he was determined to not lose his composure. Surely, after enough time had passed, this nightmare of forced simulation would end, and he was determined to bide his time with dignity and composure. He returned to his room and meditated the night away. When dawn came, he meditated all the longer. Eventually, after a number of hours had passed, he heard a knock on his door. "Anakin, I know that sometimes you need your beauty sleep, my young apprentice, but this borders on the extreme, don't you think?" Vader maintained his meditation. He would not allow this facade to perturb him one iota. "Anakin, please, spare me the indignity of opening this door." Darth Vader inhaled ever so slightly. If this was how Sidious or the Force or some pathetic part of his subconscious wanted to play this game, so be it. He would not only play along with this game, he would win it. He would live out this fantasy as if it was just another memory, and act exactly as he used to act. He would not lash out in any extreme of giving in to his wrath and slaughtering the Jedi once more, nor would he give in to some pathetically hopeful desire for a second chance to fix his mistakes, as he had so many times in his dreams before. He knew well and good how to mask his power in the dark side of the Force, having been the apprentice of a Sith Lord for over 20 years who managed to mask his power in the dark side from the Jedi seamlessly. Vader came to the door and opened it. "Sorry, Master. I'm a growing boy and I need plenty of food and rest if I'm going to become as strong as you one day. Speaking of which, did you bring me any food?" As the voice of Anakin Skywalker, Jedi Padawan, left his lips, Darth Vader gave a most convincing and sly smirk as he looked at Obi-Wan Kenobi before him. Having long since conquered and honed his rage towards his old master, he felt at ease putting on this little act to toy with whatever pathetic conductor of the simulation was. Besides, as convincing and real as the man standing before him was, he was no more real than a hologram. When he met the real Obi-Wan again, the circle would be complete, and this time Vader would be the master. Obi-Wan gave a wry smirk and shook his head in disapproval. "If you want food, my Padawan, you'll be disappointed to learn that I am your master, not your butler, and you'll have to retrieve your food yourself. But that'll have to wait until later. It's far past time for your morning training exercises, and you've missed your window of opportunity for breakfast," Obi-Wan said as he began to walk away. "That's all right, Master. I am not hungry anyways," Vader said in a light tone as he followed Obi-Wan, remembering the playful and pathetic banter he used to have with his former master. In the training sessions with Obi-Wan, Vader did his best to hold himself back and replicate the fighting style he once had, knowing full well he had the skill with a lightsaber and strength in the Force to easily defeat and destroy this much younger and less experienced Obi-Wan. The rest of the day would play out as Vader remembered, a day full of training, Jedi meditation, incessant lectures from the self-proclaimed wise Jedi masters and council members. Vader did his best to maintain his calmness and performance as the hours passed, despite being partially surprised at how long this forced simulation on his mind had lasted. He was determined to outlast the patience of whoever was maintaining it. Surely, something would slip eventually. Something out of place would happen, for maintaining such a detailed facade for so long would certainly prove difficult even for his master Darth Sidious. As the day came to a close, Obi-Wan said to him, "Well, despite the late start, your performance today was adequate." All right. It was more than just adequate. You've learned a lot, Anakin, and you are growing into a fine Jedi. I know that our duty on Ancion was a tiring mission, so I'm willing to have a little more understanding than usual for your sleeping in so late. But still, that was far too long, Anakin. Listen to me, you may be the chosen one, but you'll only realize your full potential if you apply the wisdom and discipline that is necessary. Obi-Wan gently rested a hand on Anakin's shoulder in sincerity. His tone was that of the caring, although condescending, master Vader remembered him to be. Yet Vader could tell he did genuinely have faith in the young Padawan, Anakin, and in his potential. And how right he was of the potential he had. If he only knew the power of the dark side, that with this young body and his higher midichlorian count, if Vader were to throw aside his mask as Anakin and give Obi-Wan a full demonstration of his power in the dark side, he could crush him like the insignificant insect he was and is. I know, Master. You're right, as always, Vader said in that pathetic, humble, and submissive tone he used to have with that old fool. Obi-Wan patted Vader's shoulder and smiled. All right, that's enough lecturing for one day. I'll see you first thing in the morning. Obi-Wan started to walk away, and as he did so, he turned around and pointed at him. And I mean first thing in the morning, Anakin. Vader smiled and then turned and entered his room, an expression of stoic composure once more replacing his face as he tossed aside the mask of Anakin Skywalker. Although never in his life had Vader experienced anything quite like this for this length of time, he was determined, with the determination of a Sith Lord, to endure and conquer this fake Force-induced facade. Yet, as Vader crawled into bed, he realized something. Something Obi-Wan had said. Ancion. He remembered. The border dispute on Ancion. That means that tomorrow would be the day that he and his master all those years ago had learned of the assassination attempt of Padme Amidala and were assigned to be her protectors. Vader refused to think any more about this. He used all his skills of meditation, the Force, and his steeled mind to push the thoughts out of his mind. The thoughts that this could not only be a second chance to start his life over, this could be a second chance to start his entire relationship with Padme over again. A second chance to save his mother. Vader fought off such feelings and closed his mind off into a state of blackness, and would soon drift off to sleep, more tired than he realized, from spending the entire day putting on a performance as the young, naive Padawan he once was. Vader woke up not long after falling asleep, having another forced premonition of his mother dying at the hands of the Tusken Raiders. He was, of course, still in his old quarters in the Jedi Temple. Back when he originally had these visions, they did not come until a few days from now, when he was on Naboo with Padme. He could only assume that because of the combination of his higher strength and attunement in the Force being brought back into this fully intact body, which had more midichlorians than his burnt and mutilated body, he was receiving the premonitions earlier than he had originally. Or, that would be a great display of attention to detail on the part of the conductor of this simulation. But at this point, Vader was finally entertaining the possibility that perhaps this is no simulation. He had no idea how this would be possible, but Darth Vader was no novice in the art of manipulation and illusion. He had experienced and executed enough deception, had endured enough nightmares of reliving his past, to recognize the difference between a dream and reality. Not just through instinct and feeling alone, but through the Force itself, a much more reliable source. If this was some sort of illusion, it would have to be induced through some sort of technology, creating a convincing artificial world from the memories of his past. But even then, Vader was not convinced of such a possibility. Vader was not exactly a deep sleeper, and the places where he slept were not exactly easy to access. Even if some guard with a death wish was foolish enough to approach him in his bacta tank, to try to place some kind of device or induce him with a sedative, Vader would immediately sense his presence and his intention through the Force, and quickly awake out of his slumber. No, Vader could sense, through the Force, that everything around him was real. He could feel the living Force itself, not an easy thing to replicate, to say the least. Vader did not want to fully surrender himself to believing this was real, but he would not allow his fear to cause him to have greater faith in his skepticism than in what most likely is the truth. He considered the possibilities. If all this was fake, and he were to take the actions that he would take as if he knew it were real, what would the worst case scenario be? If, when he awoke, his master Sidious, or some other creature was standing there, sneering and cackling, then there would be temporary humiliation, which he would instantly channel into his raging power in the dark side to snap said creature in two. If they were not Darth Sidious. In the grand scheme of things, was it worth risking a forfeit of a real second chance just to try to deprive the hypothetical conductor of this hypothetical simulation of whatever reaction they wanted from Vader? No. And if this is real, he knows the Jedi had told him that he was the chosen one. He knew of his power and his potential. Perhaps he unintentionally utilized his power in the Force to transfer his mind through time into his younger body, triggered by some subconscious part of himself locked deep away that wanted a second chance. Or perhaps the will of the living Force itself was to cause this transference. Whatever the case was, Vader used his reasoning and logic, as well as his faith in the understanding that his power in the Force gave him, to conclude that it was more likely that this was indeed his new, or rather his old, reality. He would not risk Padme. He would not risk his mother. The time for planning was now. He had contemplated what he would do differently was seen to be countless times before. Now, he need only flesh out every last detail. Vader knew that at this very moment, his mother Shmi was being held captive by the Tusken Raiders. For he remembered that by the time he had the visions of his mother dying on Naboo with Padme, and left to Tatooine to check on her, Klieg Lars notified Anakin that she'd been kidnapped by the Tusken Raiders a month ago. Vader also knew that tomorrow there would be a failed assassination attempt on Padme. Although when this originally happened, Padme survived, Vader was not willing to bet on that happening again. He would not take any chances. Vader decided he would leave an anonymous tip to notify Senator Amidala that her life is in danger, because she is being hunted by a bounty hunter, and that it would not be safe to land on the platform of Coruscant, and to stay put on Naboo for now under heavy guard. Then he would depart immediately for Tatooine to save his mother. But Vader knew tomorrow he would be called upon by Darth Sidious parading as Chancellor Palpatine to become Padme's bodyguard alongside Obi-Wan. And if he were to be absent in that time of need, without any excuse or plausible deniability by himself, he could be disciplined or outright expelled from the Jedi Order. Vader, of course, had no love for the Jedi. But he knew that being assigned to guard Padme on Naboo is what enabled them to be alone together and fall in love. Trying to court Padme and have alone time with her enough to convince her to give their relationship a chance would most likely prove very difficult for someone who was just expelled from the Jedi Order, as she would be heavily under guard and very busy in her duties, and it was not until she came to spend time with Anakin that she would change her view of him from that little boy she knew on Tatooine. It is very likely that in that scenario, she would not give him the time of day. So although he hated the very thought of it, he would need to ask Obi-Wan's help with this. But first, he needed to leave the anonymous tip as quickly as possible. Using his years of training and experience, Vader easily snuck out of the Jedi Temple without anyone noticing. He snuck onto a flying vehicle that was transporting some cargo into a shady part of the streets of Coruscant. He stayed hidden in the shadows and looked for any criminals that had a mask. He found one and easily managed to separate him from his friends without anyone noticing and knocked him unconscious, stealing his mask. Killing him would cause his friends to cause a manhunt when they eventually did not hear from him for several days, and Vader did not need that level of chaos. But their friend waking up with his mask missing and having no idea who stole it was simply par for the course for the criminal underbelly of Coruscant. Vader used his blue lightsaber to change the pattern on the mask ever so slightly to make it totally unrecognizable. Then he stalked in the shadows once more and found an unsuspecting fellow with a comlink walking by himself. He pulled him into the shadows and spoke with a menacing voice, altering it not only to sound threatening, but different from his typical tone, so as to take all possible measures to hide his identity. He told him to leave an anonymous tip right here and now with his comlink directly to Padme Amidala, as he had planned. He instructed him to not mention how he heard this tip, and not to mention him to anyone. If he did, he knew how to find him, and he knew what would happen to him. The frightened fellow did as instructed, and upon hearing Captain Gregor Typho asking who this was, how they heard this tip, and how they knew Senator Amidala's personal contact information, he hung up immediately. Vader was satisfied, knowing that since Gregor Typho was in charge of Padme's security, he would take the tip seriously and keep Padme from the assassination attempt. Vader returned to the Jedi Temple unnoticed and made his way to Obi-Wan's room. If Obi-Wan would be skeptical and reluctant, Vader would just need to be all the more insistent and convincing. Master, wake up, Vader said, after having opened Obi-Wan's door, standing in his room. Obi-Wan opened his eyes and looked up at his Padawan. Anakin, I know I said to wake up earlier this time, but this once again borders on the extreme. Vader walked closer to Obi-Wan. Master, I have had a vision in the Force. I know why I've been dreaming of my mother. She is in great danger. She has been captured by Tusken Raiders, and she could be killed at any moment. Please, come with me and help me save her. Obi-Wan sat up with a concerned and stern expression. Before he could say a word, Vader fell to his knees. Master, please. I remember, a few years ago I told you I wanted to leave the Jedi Order. You told me you were ready to leave it with me if that truly would be my decision. Vader met Obi-Wan's eyes, fake but convincing tears welling up in his eyes. I'm asking you to follow me now, as you were willing to do so then. I will not allow my mother to be killed. If you won't join me, I will go alone, and by tomorrow my disappearance will be noted, and surely I will be expelled from the Jedi Order. But if you leave with me now for Tatooine, we can save her and be back by tomorrow. The Jedi Council doesn't need to know, Master. We can think up an excuse for why we had to leave. Some sort of urgent mission. We may be disciplined by the Council, but with you vouching for me, I can remain a Jedi. I don't want to stop being a Jedi, but I will if I must. If it means I'm able to save my mother. Tears streamed down Darth Vader's face as he locked eyes with Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan remembered the promise he made to Qui-Gon to train this boy, and he indeed was willing to leave the Jedi Order if Anakin chose to leave it a few years back. Obi-Wan knew that when he agreed to train this boy, it would be no easy task. It was no secret to Obi-Wan and the Jedi Council that Anakin had much fear in him. Obi-Wan knew that if Anakin's mother were to die, he would be filled with a rage and hatred greater than ever before, and would be more susceptible than ever into slipping into the dark side. If Anakin were to leave by himself, it's questionable whether or not he would be successful, or if he would be able to control himself. He also thought of losing Qui-Gon, and how if he had a second chance to save him, he would take it. Although he knew the Jedi Council would not fully approve of this, Obi-Wan felt he had no other choice. He stood up and offered a hand to Vader, saying, "Then there's no time to waste." Darth Vader, masquerading as the Jedi Padawan Anakin Skywalker, landed on Tatooine with the young Obi-Wan Kenobi. By bringing Obi-Wan along with him, and not simply leaving in the night totally unbeknownst to anyone, Vader would be able to save his mother from the Tusken Raiders while preserving his reputation with Obi-Wan, and by extension his reputation with the Jedi Council, ensuring that he would be able to have the same chance to court Padme Amidala that he had had when he originally was assigned to be her guardian. The hateful, dark side imbued rage within Vader surged under the surface ferociously and potently as he came closer to a chance to save his mother from the animals that had slaughtered her in his original timeline, like magma deep under a dormant volcano, undetectable from the outside. While Vader was allowing a certain amount of rage to surface, Obi-Wan was unable to detect the full extent of Vader's dark emotions. If Vader were to act totally devoid of wrath, it would not be in keeping with his character of the well-intentioned but brash and often emotionally unhinged youth that Anakin Skywalker was. Vader and Obi-Wan ran across the desert sand in a Force-induced sprint to get on board some speeders. "Anakin, listen to me. We will do everything we can to save your mother, but do not allow your rage to control your actions," Obi-Wan said as they each got on their speeders. "You think too little of me, Master, although your wisdom is appreciated. That is another reason why I asked you to accompany me." Obi-Wan gave a concerned and caring glance at Anakin before looking forward at the desert horizon. "You're sure that in your vision you saw the destination of the camp?" Vader nodded. "I'm certain." In actuality, Vader simply remembered where she was from when he had originally gone after her. Thankfully, now there would be no need to waste a moment talking to that cowardly buffoon Klieg Lars to discover the exact whereabouts of his mother. Knowing her exact destination through a vision of the Force, although not exactly true, was the perfect excuse to use to go straight after her. It was in the morning by the time they arrived on Tatooine, and it would be late afternoon by the time they would arrive at the camp. Vader remembered the cliff overlooking the camp of savages that he had taken back when he had attempted to save his mother and failed. "I can sense her. My mother is down there," Vader said aloud, Obi-Wan nodding in agreement. "I sense her too." Last time, it was night, and the Tusken Raiders were mostly in their tents or resting around their campfires, making infiltration of the camp seamless. This time, the Tusken Raiders were lively and out and about, but he and Obi-Wan had already planned for that on the way to Tatooine. Now, we need to be quick and precise, yet tread very lightly if we are to successfully lure two of them away. Now, I know we have already discussed this, but we should do our best to avoid violence. And if violence is unavoidable, we should do our best to avoid any loss of life if we can. Please, Anakin, promise me this." Vader looked over at Obi-Wan and nodded. "Of course, Master." Obi-Wan looked down, thinking of whatever other words of wisdom or consolation he could share with his apprentice. And Anakin. By the time Obi-Wan looked up to where his apprentice had been, he had already jumped off the cliff, cushioning his fall with the Force. I hate it when he does that. Obi-Wan followed suit and hid next to Vader behind some rocks near the camp. Vader spotted 2 Tusken Raiders standing outside the tent where he could sense his mother was located. "She's in there." Obi-Wan nodded. Obi-Wan used a Jedi mind trick on the 2 Tusken Raiders to have them believe there was something interesting to look at in the opposite direction of where Anakin and Obi-Wan were headed. As they turned their heads, Obi-Wan and Vader snuck up behind the 2 guards and knocked them unconscious, quickly dragging them behind the rocks. Emerging from the rocks, disguised as Tusken Raiders and holding their staves, they made their way to the tent where Shmi was in. Vader's heart beat within him, in the fear of what state his mother would be in as they entered the tent. The sight of seeing Shmi tied up against that same barbaric wooden frame immediately caused Vader's fear and rage to skyrocket. Having trouble trying to hide the full extent of his emotions from Obi-Wan. Yes, he had relived this nightmare countless times over, but this was different. For as he had observed before, the likelihood that this was all an extended nightmare or simulation was slim. Yet this immediate knee-jerk emotional reaction immediately started to lessen in pressure as he recognized that this time his mother was standing up, looking at them. Yes, she still had fresh scratches and bruises on her body, and she clearly had suffered at the hands of those animals. But the color was still in her skin. She was not pale in moments from death as when he had originally found her, arriving several days later in that time. But this time, arriving several days prior, his mother was still very much alive. Her eyes were full of fear as she looked upon what she thought to be the Tusken Raiders coming back to torment her. Vader's eyes were full of tears, hidden from the view of Obi-Wan and his mother, as he did his best to contain himself. He could feel through the Force that this was indeed his mother. There is no way Vader could conceive of that some sort of simulation could replicate the very real sense of his mother before him that he could feel in the Force. Obi-Wan lightly touched Vader's arm to remind him to keep his composure and to stick with the plan, as he could sense the powerful emotions within his apprentice and could see that he was standing there motionless for nearly an entire minute. Vader regained his composure and walked forward and whispered to Shmi, "Mom, it's me, Anakin, your son. Stay quiet, we are getting you out of here." Shmi's eyes lighted up with confusion and wonder as Vader freed her from her restraints. "Wait a moment while Obi-Wan makes sure the way is clear," Vader whispered to his mother as Obi-Wan nodded, stepping outside the tent and standing guard. A few Tusken Raiders were walking around, looking at their massive hounds fighting over some bones, and it was clear the tent was in their line of sight. As one of the mastiffs shook the bone in its mouth ferociously, he used the Force to cause that bone to slip out of its mouth and collide with the shins of one of the Tusken Raiders far from Shmi's tent. Several mastiffs all ravenously fought for the bone at the foot of the Tusken Raider, who kicked at them from the pain of the bone impacting his shin. This little scene of chaos was just enough to catch the attention of all the Tusken Raiders in the area, allowing for Obi-Wan, Vader, and Shmi to escape her tent unnoticed. Vader instructed his mother to wrap her arms around his neck as he and Obi-Wan scaled the cliff quickly. Once upon the top of the cliff and far out of sight of the Tusken Raiders, Vader and Obi-Wan removed their masks. "Annie, it really is you." Tears streamed down Vader's face, and there was no need for acting, for these were very much real. "You're safe now, Mom. I'm never going to let anything happen to you. You'll always be safe from now on." He and his mother embraced. "I'm so sorry. I didn't come to you sooner." Vader said this partially referring to the fact that in his original timeline, Vader was too late to save his mother. If Vader had a chance to start his entire life over, he would never have left her in the first place. He would never leave her for the empty, hollow, and vain life of a Jedi. He would stay by her side and protect her. Yet now, he did not need to fantasize about what could have been, because his mother truly was standing before him alive. Feeling his mother's embrace, he felt more certain than ever that this was real. When they made their way back to Klieg Lar's residence, Vader insisted that for the time being, Shmi would need to be brought back to Coruscant so that she could be protected, and was able to convince Klieg and his family that if they wanted to stay with Shmi, they would need to join her on Coruscant. This was not negotiable, and trying to argue or bargain with Darth Vader was a nigh impossible task, regardless if he was in disguise as the young Anakin and did not have his imposing black suit. As they all boarded the ship with Vader and Obi-Wan, Vader felt a feeling he had not felt this strongly in years. Fear. Fear that now he actually had something to lose. It was fear that drove him to the dark side in an attempt to receive the power he needed to save what he feared losing, which drove him to tapping into his rage to fuel that power. Then, when he lost everything he was afraid of losing, all that was left was that rage, that hatred, which is what quite literally sustained his life force through the power of the dark side of the Force. When Vader initially embraced the dark side, his fear and rage ran rampant and out of control, and like a fire through a forest, led to the destruction of everything he loved. This time, Vader was wiser. He would not deny his fear, like the callous and apathetic Jedi had counseled him to do. He would embrace his fear, his rage, his hatred, along with his attachment to his mother and to Padme, but this time he would hone that fire and channel it with expert precision to truly save his loved ones. Now that the short-term and immediate needs were taken care of, saving his mother and Padme, he needed to have a long-term plan to protect his mother and Padme. And that would mean he needed to figure out a way to deal with his former master. Not Obi-Wan. He was of little concern. But Darth Sidious, masquerading as the benevolent Senator Palpatine. He would need to plan for how to beat Sidious at his own game, that of using the power of the dark side to pull the strings and stand triumphant over his enemies while remaining undetected. Anakin awoke in what seemed to be water. Was this a dream? He looked around. He seemed to be in some sort of transparent container. No, this wasn't water. This is a Bacta tank. This did not seem like a dream. What happened? Did he get injured in his sleep and then get placed in here in an attempt to save his life? Anakin tried to get a look at the rest of his body to see what injuries he may have sustained. Panic took over him as he realized he was missing both legs and both arms. Hey everyone. So, to preface this video, I just want to emphasize that we are going to see Anakin in Vader's body. This is not something, again, like I said last video, this is not a thing where Vader was dreaming the whole time. No, they really did switch bodies. What we're going to see is Anakin inside of the body of Darth Vader during the events of A New Hope, or the events right before A New Hope. And then we're going to switch back and forth between that perspective and the perspective of Darth Vader in the body of young Anakin during the events of Attack of the Clones. So just keep that in mind so you don't freak out as we move forward here. Okay, let's go ahead and jump in. Anakin felt a wave of terror and panic wash over him as he realized that his arms and legs were missing and his body looked to have been severely burnt. What happened to him? This had to be a nightmare. He looked around, trying to see what was outside the bacta tank and to get an understanding of his surroundings. But not recognizing where he was at made him panic even more. Thankfully, no amount of his heavy breathing and flailing would cause the bacta tank any damage due to the very secure breathing tubes and bacta tank, but as his emotions ran rampant, he inadvertently started to lash out in the Force, and when he saw a crack form in the bacta tank, that gave him a bit of pause. He realized that he needed to calm down. It seemed this bacta tank was the only thing keeping him alive. If this broke, what would he do? Even if he was being held captive by some sort of enemy to the Jedi, he would have no power to protect himself without the ability to walk or even wield a lightsaber. A state of shock started to replace the panic as he calmed down. Anakin decided to analyze the situation he was in. The room he was in did not at all look familiar. Perhaps this was an advanced medical facility on Coruscant, or perhaps some other planet. He realized what was left of his body looked burnt, and it did not at all look fresh. It seemed that whatever happened to him had happened several months ago at least, and now his body had began to scar over. The shock Anakin was experiencing was giving him a temporary feeling of calm and stillness. He thought to himself about what the most likely scenario could be. Perhaps he had been in some sort of freak accident, or perhaps he was in a battle that not only was the cause of his injuries, but also left him with memory loss about the battle itself. The last thing he could remember was getting back from the border dispute mission with Obi-Wan and Ancion, and laying down to rest in his quarters at the Jedi Temple. Whatever had happened, he was most likely being tended to by the Jedi and Republic, being kept alive for months, and he was just now waking from a coma. Or perhaps this was just a very strange nightmare after all. Whatever the case, all he needed to do now was wait. At any moment he was sure Obi-Wan would walk in and explain everything to him. He needed only to wait. Patience, Obi-Wan always told him. Patience. Switching back to the perspective of Darth Vader inside the body of the Padawan Anakin in the past, upon arriving at Coruscant, Vader was able to arrange a safe place under the protection of the Republic for his mother, Shmi, along with the Lars family to stay. Shortly after, the Jedi Council explained to Anakin and Obi-Wan that in the middle of the night, they'd been notified by Padme Amidala that she had received an anonymous tip that her life is in danger, and not to land on Coruscant this morning. She would be staying on Naboo for the time being under protection, and the Jedi Council assigned Anakin to be sent to be her personal bodyguard to ensure her safety, while the Jedi Council had assigned Obi-Wan to investigate who could be behind the supposed threat on Padme's life, as when Vader had given the anonymous tip, he also gave the detail that a bounty hunter was the one behind the threat. This was exactly what Vader had planned for. It would be a recreation of the same circumstances that he and Padme had originally been in, which led to her falling in love with him. This would be the perfect time to have a second start with Padme, as well as to have some time to flesh out his longer-term plans to ensure the safety of Padme and his mother. After bidding farewell to his mother and to Obi-Wan, Vader would make his way to Naboo for his assignment to protect Padme. His time with her was such a shocking contrast with what Vader was used to. Although for him it was not technically the first time he had kindled a relationship with her, it had been well over 20 years since he had, and he quite literally felt like an entirely different person back then. In Vader's mind, he killed the persona of Anakin Skywalker when he transformed into Darth Vader. Now, adopting the persona of Anakin was much more akin to how Darth Sidious adopted the moniker of Senator Palpatine, it merely being a mask to hide the Sith Lord beneath. But even if Vader did not feel like the same Anakin that Padme fell in love with, that did not change the fact that Vader never really stopped loving Padme. And although he was putting on a facade pretending to be the same Anakin she knew, showing her the romantic and loving emotions he had for her was as genuine as could be. If anything, now that Vader was more experienced and had learned to control his emotions better, he would have a greater ability to maintain control over his temporary outbursts of darkness that had caused Padme to fear him in the past, and may even have an easier time of advancing their relationship. Meanwhile, switching back to the perspective of Anakin in Vader's body, hours had passed. No one had come into the room to check on Anakin. This caused him great confusion as he was certain that Obi-Wan or someone would come in to check in on him and his recovery from whatever accident he assumed he had been in. As the time passed, and as the shock began to wear off, and as he did not awake from what he hoped was a nightmare, Anakin began to feel an intense sense of dread and despair as the full weight of the realization that he no longer had his arms and legs pressed down on him, and what remained of his body was horribly scarred from burn damage. Feeling drained of hope and waking up to this reality, and having been waiting for hours for someone to show up, Anakin also felt drained of his energy and fell into a sleep. Eventually, Anakin awoke as he heard a voice echoing through the room. "Lord Vader, there is an urgent transmission for you from Grand Moff Tarkin. He requests to speak with you immediately." Anakin assumed this came from some sort of intercom. Several droids then emerged from the shadows, and immediately Anakin started to be ejected from the bacta tank as the droids automatically began to connect robotic limbs to his arms and legs, and then place a black suit on him. His mind swirled with questions and confusion. That man called him Lord Vader? What is going on? His train of thought was interrupted by a sharp pain as a helmet was placed on his head, as what he felt to be needles pierced the top of his skull and spine. He audibly expressed this pain and backhanded the droid that placed the helmet on him, who fell to the floor. It was then Anakin realized that he now had the ability to move his cybernetic limbs, when before the helmet was placed, he was not able to. He realized, being the mechanic he was, that they must be some sort of neural needles that enabled him to make use of these limbs. The breathing tube that was attached to his mouth in the bacta tank was disconnected from his mouth and replaced with a breathing apparatus part of the mask. The droid he had backhanded spoke up. "Lord Vader, forgive me, as you know the needles are essential although painful. Forgive me, Lord Vader." Anakin looked back at the droid, again with being called Lord Vader. What could this possibly mean? "It's all right." Anakin was shocked at the sound of his voice, coming out sounding very deep and robotic. Also, with each breath he took, he heard a loud, mechanical sounding inhale and exhale. It seemed that his lungs had been damaged in whatever accident happened to him as well. Anakin stood there, fully enveloped in this black armor, and noticed he was much taller than he was used to. The pain from the neural needles penetrating his skull and his mask was intense. Anakin felt woozy and swayed slightly from the pain and from how overwhelmed he felt at his terrifying and confusing circumstances, still sinking into a feeling of despair from the loss of limbs and bewildered and why he was being called Darth Vader, and why he was put inside of this massive black armor. He stumbled to a nearby wall and leaned his hand against it, breathing heavily, the sound of the loud mechanical breath becoming faster. We switch back to the perspective of Vader, recreating and reliving the events that led to he and Padme falling in love was having a powerful effect upon Vader. He had started to notice this effect upon him when he saved his mother and was feeling it even stronger now. For the first time in decades, he was feeling happiness. He was smiling true and genuine smiles. Actual laughter was leaving his lips. He felt in his heart the warmth and resplendence of love, comfort, and peace. These feelings felt strange and alien to him, for hatred, anger, regret, these were the only emotions he felt within him for so long. These emotions made him feel uncomfortable. He was so accustomed to being devoid of anything resembling joy. That aforementioned fear he felt within him only grew the more he felt this joy and love. He must become more powerful as he could be, to make sure he does not lose his mother and Padme this time. But at the same time, he also must make sure he does not let his emotions run wild and out of his control like last time, lest he risk destroying the ones he loves and his connection with them. In light of this, he became more and more sure of his plans for the future. The end goal would be what his original goal had been when he had first embraced the dark side. He would create his empire and enforce peace and justice through the galaxy in the way he envisioned it, in order to protect those he loved, and to end corruption in the galaxy and bring reason, even if he needed to enforce it with an iron fist, and would destroy the obstacles that stood in the way of this goal. Not just the Jedi, but Darth Sidious as well. But this time, his plan to achieve that goal would be different and more calculated. He would allow for Sidious to enact Order 66 so the clones could take care of the Jedi, but then he would expose Sidious to the entire galaxy, that he was the one behind everything, the Clone Wars, the Separatists, and he would convince the Senate to execute Order 65 against Sidious, which would authorize the detainment of the Supreme Chancellor through lethal force if necessary, if it was found he was unfit to issue orders. And he would watch as the entire galaxy turned on Sidious, including the clones, and he would personally lead the charge against Sidious and destroy him himself. Then, in the vacancy of power, and the end of the destructive Jedi and the corrupt Chancellor, he would rise as the hero of the galaxy, as the one who helped defeat the Jedi and expose the Chancellor, and with this positive perception of him, he would pull all the right strings, even if they needed to be pulled in the shadows to seize power and be the head of his new empire. Then he would protect his family, including his future children, and give them the peace, freedom, justice, and security that his new empire could provide for them. Darth Vader reveled in his plan and contemplated it as he spent his time with Padme on Naboo. Although for the time being, Padme would tell Vader that their relationship could not happen because of her position as senator and his as a Jedi, he knew of the inevitability of her ultimately confessing her love and that they would ultimately be married. Now, he only needed to do his best to recreate the events that led to that and have patience. Anakin leaned against a wall, adorned with the armor of Darth Vader. Although he had no idea that this was the suit of Darth Vader, nor did he have any idea who Darth Vader was, despite everyone calling him Lord Vader. He could only speculate as to what any of this meant. One possibility he could think of was that perhaps he was captured by some powerful cult that had brainwashed him into becoming their soldier, giving him the moniker Lord Vader, and somehow he had just recently broken free of their brainwashing. Whether or not this was the case, Anakin felt certain he was in great danger. Everything about the circumstances he found himself in was a nightmare, but not one he could wake up from. He needed to escape wherever he was and find the Jedi, find Obi-Wan. Anakin tried to calm himself down, seeking to feel peace through the assistance of the Force. The man on the intercom said that Grand Moff Tarkin wanted to speak with him. Anakin had no idea who Tarkin was, as Anakin would not meet Tarkin until after the Clone Wars began, and as for this version of Anakin, the Clone Wars had not yet begun. Anakin thought to himself that he had to avoid talking to this Grand Moff Tarkin at all costs, because whoever these people were, they would very quickly realize that Anakin was not the same as the Lord Vader that they knew. For Anakin had no idea what kind of a person this Lord Vader was, nor did he have any of the knowledge of Lord Vader. And he might be able to deceive some people for a short time, but the more time he spent interacting with these people, the more inevitable it was that he would be found out. This felt especially true for this Grand Moff Tarkin, who sounded very official from his title. He looked at his surroundings. Whatever his next move would be, he would need to try his best to act how Lord Vader would act, so as to avoid suspicion, until he could make his escape. He thought of the tone of the man who spoke to him through the intercom, the reaction of the droid after he backhanded it in pain, and the very title of Lord itself. From these pieces of information, Anakin thought that whoever this Lord Vader person was, he was probably a figure that demanded respect, and may very well be imposing or even threatening. So, Anakin would do his best to avoid being seen and interacting with anyone, and if he was, he needed to act natural, talk as little as possible, and try to act how he thought that Lord Vader would act. Meanwhile, the real Lord Vader was enjoying the young and uninjured body of the Padawan Anakin, as well as the company of Senator Padme Amidala. This time, he had more time to bond with her, even if she pretended that she did not feel the same way he did as of yet, because of the fact that he did not have to worry about his mother this time, for she was safe on Coruscant. In a few days, Vader knew that Obi-Wan would contact him with information about the plans he would unearth about the schemes of Dooku and the Separatists. Although Vader felt a great sense of security knowing his mother was safe, and knowing what would happen in the future, and from having a plan in place for the future to keep his mother and Padme safe, he felt it very difficult to relax during this time. For this reason, for the past several days, in the middle of the night, Vader would sneak out of his luxurious chambers on Naboo and find an isolated place to train. Vader's heart throbbed with anxiety as he stood in the forests of Naboo, as the intense fear of loss he experienced before of losing the ones he loves was further intensified by the post-traumatic stress of his memories of having already lost them once before, and his anxious desires to prevent that from happening a second time caused him to feel himself overflowing with anxiety, fear, and rage. The image of Darth Sidious haunted him in the back of his mind constantly, looming over him. The monster that he made a pact with, a pact he made to guarantee he would have the power needed to save Padme. That monster pretended to care about Vader, but all he cared about was power. And when Vader had lost Padme, because he could not control his overflowing rage that he had just recently embraced, Sidious felt not one shred of remorse nor mourning, but delight. That it would be one more source of dark emotion that would fuel Vader's power in the dark side. Had Sidious truly cared about Vader, he would have taken more time to train him in the dark side before sending him off as his servant of slaughter, totally unprepared for how to effectively wield the power of the dark side of the Force without being utterly consumed with it. Vader was convinced that had he been able to control his newfound powers in the dark side, he not only would have been able to stop himself from lashing out at Padme, but he would have easily been able to destroy Obi-Wan, for in Vader's mind, the only reason Obi-Wan had won was because he exploited Vader's out-of-control emotions and arrogance. All of this because his so-called master, the self-proclaimed emperor of the galaxy, did not bother to train him how to control and hone his infinitely overflowing well of dark power in the Force at the time when it mattered most. He remembered back to when he feigned weakness against Mace Windu, only to then declare and demonstrate his unlimited power, his unlimited deceit, unleashing a torrent of that surging Sith lightning to devastate Mace Windu. That same unlimited deceit was again put on display when Vader had learned the hard way that Sidious had purposefully designed his suit to be weak to lightning as a built-in insurance policy that was permanently attached to Vader everywhere he went, were he ever to feel tempted to act out on his desires to snuff the life out of Sidious. That terrifying lightning that he could never himself use due to having lost his limbs, almost a symbol of his failure in being able to accomplish the things that he wanted to accomplish by embracing the dark side in the first place. This did not stop Vader from learning all that he could about the ability to conjure lightning over the years, as well as everything he could about his master of unlimited deceit, Darth Sidious. Now, Vader was not missing his limbs. Now, Vader had learned the hard way how to control his dark emotions and therefore his power in the dark side. He allowed himself to fall into the endless black abyss of his fear of once more losing his mother, of once more losing Padme, and he felt the endless anguish and sting it caused him, and he channeled all of that fear into rage, pure, unbridled rage, and then allowed that rage to bring to the surface the endless ocean of the caustic venom that was his hatred. And in this moment, he chose to not let the endless wellspring of darkness he felt seeping out from him simply overflow indiscriminately, but he chose to channel it and focus it onto one singular target, one man, one monster, one coward. The visual of Darth Sidious unleashing a torrent of Sith lightning flashed in Vader's mind, but it felt so real that it felt as if he was standing there in that forest with him, aiming that lightning at him, and in that moment, he lashed out in the ultimate wrathful hatred towards Darth Sidious, and Darth Vader unleashed a massive sprawling web of Sith lightning, illuminating the dark forest he was in and piercing every tree and plant in the nearby vicinity. Finally, after several days of sneaking out to train in the dead of night, Vader managed to conjure Sith lightning for the very first time. Vader's eyes were a deep yellow, stained with the power of the dark side that he felt overflowing out of him, and at first he felt it difficult to control and contain this power. But as he fixed his focus on Darth Sidious, and as he remembered all the skills and control he had gained from decades of training to control the dark side, he molded and morphed this web of lightning into a controlled and focused torrent, like the kind he had seen his master use, and he aimed it at one single tree, causing it to flow and surge with electricity until it burst into flame. Vader fell to his knees, gasping out a sigh, similar to that sickening sigh that Sidious had given after murdering Mace Windu with his power. Was it a sigh of relief? Perhaps it was, for he was sure that Sidious, at that time, did feel relieved, as he must have felt a certainty, as he was unleashing that lightning, that things would happen exactly how he wanted them to happen. Perhaps Vader sighed for that same reason, feeling certain this time things would unroll according to the plans of the Sith Lord Darth Vader, not Darth Sidious. He reveled in this feeling. This time, he felt unlimited power was in his control, and would bow to his will, as he used the Force to cause some water from a nearby pond to extinguish the flame of the tree from spreading, almost symbolizing the ability Vader now had to extinguish the flames of the dark side from spreading out of his control. Switching back to Anakin inhabiting the body of Darth Vader, adorned with his suit, Anakin strolled through the halls of the Star Destroyer, although he, of course, had no idea that that is what he was inside of. He did his best to look confident and imposing, despite how strange and awkward he felt, as he tried to get used to the feeling of walking with artificial legs and arms, and the pain from the neural needles in his head, and the general confusion and dread he felt from his circumstances. Despite all this, he trusted in the Force as his ally. He was the chosen one after all, he told himself, to try to give him some sort of sense of confidence and reassurance. Anakin also tried to avoid being seen by anyone, despite passing by several soldiers in strange white armor that slightly resembled his black armor, brandishing blasters, who seemed to do their best to avoid eye contact with him and give him a respectfully presented wide berth as he walked past them. It would not take long before he realized from the hallways of this ship that this was indeed a ship and not some advanced planetary medical facility. This is actually good news, he told himself, for a ship would be easier to escape than a compound on a planet. All he needed to do was find an escape pod and set the coordinates for Coruscant, or maybe some nearby planet, just in case they would detect the escape pod leaving and follow him straight to Coruscant. Or perhaps going straight to Coruscant would be his best shot. Or maybe... Anakin's head throbbed as he tried to contemplate the logistics of this brash plan he was formulating, from the fear he felt and the pain he felt, both physical and mental. Right now, he just needed to figure out where the escape pods were. He decided he would need to make a gamble, because it would be too much of a risk of being seen by too many people were he to simply try to find it by searching the entirety of this ship, and who knew how massive this ship could be. He went to one of the soldiers he had walked past and commanded him to follow him, trying to sound as threatening as he could. And he was actually surprised at how threatening he sounded, for that deep robotic voice from his suit almost seemed designed to sound threatening. To his relief, the soldier in the white armor responded with an obedient and fearful, "Yes, Lord Vader." Once Anakin had the soldier alone, he told him to go to the escape pods, because he was suspicious that there may be a spy hiding in that area, and he wants him to go alone to see if he could draw the spy out. Then he, Lord Vader, would quickly arrive at the scene to dispatch of the spy. He assured the soldier he would be following him from a long distance. The soldier, being a stormtrooper, although Anakin had no idea that's what he was called, agreed obediently, although his tone had a hint of hesitation and confusion. Understandable, because Anakin knew how insane this story sounded. But he was gambling on the seeming respect and fear these people, who he grew more and more to suspect where some kind of strange cultists had for Lord Vader. Nevertheless, the stormtrooper made his way towards where the escape pods were located on the ship, and Anakin trailed him from behind a far distance, but not too far as to lose sight of the stormtrooper. Eventually, the stormtrooper came to some escape pods. He stood and investigated the area, while Anakin poked his head around the corner watching him. He contemplated knocking the soldier unconscious, but then he realized that may cause more suspicion than needed. He thought of another plan.
"Soldier, you have done well. You are dismissed. I will handle things from here. But you must listen to me. You are not permitted to tell anyone about this, nor are you to tell them that you had talked with me at all. If you do, there shall indeed be grave consequences."
Anakin felt very nervous delivering this command and threat, worrying he may be pushing his luck. But, to his relief, the soldier nodded and said, I understand, Lord Vader. I won't tell anyone," before he left the scene at a brisk pace. Anakin looked around nervously, before quickly getting into the escape pod. Now was the moment of decision. Should he go straight to Coruscant? Or is that too much of a risk? Anakin felt overwhelmed and panicked. He decided that he would go straight to Coruscant. He was certain that even if these cultists did follow him, the Republic and the Jedi could easily handle them. He set the coordinates to Coruscant and then ejected the escape pod, and he flew through space, certain that soon he would see the Jedi. He would see Master Yoda, Obi-Wan. He even felt excited to see Master Windu at this point, and then he would finally feel some relief in this nightmare. Sadly, we know that no Jedi are waiting to greet Anakin on Coruscant. Anakin flew through space in his escape pod, headed towards Coruscant. The officers of the Star Destroyer saw an escape pod eject and could sense life on it and were very confused as to who could possibly be using an escape pod to leave the ship. Perhaps it was an AWOL stormtrooper, or perhaps a rebel spy had infiltrated their ranks and was trying to escape. But this would be an incredibly unintelligent method of escape, even for rebel scum. For any rebel who is up to date on the military specs of the Empire would know that they possess the technology to sense escape pods for life forms. If this was indeed a spy, perhaps they could trail the pod and it could lead them to a rebel base. Or it could be a trap. They immediately attempted to contact Darth Vader to ask him what they would have him do. Anakin, sitting in the escape pod, nearly jumped out of his suit, metaphorically speaking of course, as he heard a sudden voice come through the earpieces of his helmet. It seemed he was still within range of the ship for them to be able to reach the signal of his suit. At first, Anakin felt extremely panicked, thinking they realized he was trying to escape. But upon hearing, "Lord Vader, we have detected an escape pod leaving the ship, and we detect life forms on board. What are your orders?" Anakin realized he got lucky. "Do not fret. I have sent a spy on an urgent and secret mission. No further questions will be asked. Understood, soldier?" Anakin gulped as he worried if he was once again pushing his luck. He was relieved to hear, "Of course, Lord Vader, as you say." Anakin sighed out in deep relief as it seemed he was indeed in the clear, and rested his eyes and tried to meditate as he made his way to Coruscant. Switching to the perspective of Darth Vader, we skip forward to the final events that took place during Attack of the Clones. As predicted, Obi-Wan contacted Vader, whom he believed to be Anakin, and asked him to relay the information about the plots and schemes of Count Dooku and the Separatists to the Jedi Council, who, of course, ordered Vader, whom they believed to be Anakin, to stay put and protect Senator Amidala, who, of course, told Vader, whom she believed to be Anakin, that they were going to go and help rescue Obi-Wan. The events then proceeded to play out mostly the same, Except this time, Vader avoided falling into the Geonosian droid factory headfirst and unprepared, which had originally led to him and Padme being separated and her coming far too close to meeting her end. This time, he managed to carefully guide her through the factory until they were apprehended by Jango Fett and droids, at which point he pretended that he had no other choice but to go with them. This led to a near-perfect recreation of Padme finally confessing her love to him just as planned. From here, things continued the same as they did originally, from their managing to escape their bounds, the Jedi coming to the rescue, the Jedi quickly being overwhelmed by droids, and then the clone troopers arriving on the scene to rescue the Jedi. However, this time, as Vader, Padme, and Obi-Wan were in close pursuit of Count Dooku, Vader made sure that Padme did not fall onto the sand below. Even though he knew she would probably survive, he did not like taking any chances. And this time, when Vader would confront Count Dooku, he would ensure that his arm does not get chopped off, although he would still let Dooku win, and try to play it off like Dooku beat him fair and square, even though Vader could easily decimate the Count. There were several reasons for this decision, one of them being that if Vader were to defeat the Count in front of Obi-Wan and Padme, it might arouse suspicion how a mere Padawan has so much skill and power. But a far greater reason was because Vader knew Dooku. He knew him like the back of his hand, the way he thinks, how powerful he is, and he knew that if he could defeat Dooku before his dark side power boost, then any time he needed Dooku out of the way, he could easily do away with him. If Vader were to get rid of Dooku now, in all likelihood, Darth Sidious would recruit some other apprentice to take his place, and that apprentice would be a total wild card, which was not something Vader wanted to risk trying to deal with. Besides, perhaps Dooku could become a useful pawn if he were to turn him and Sidious against each other. Shortly after these events took place, Padme would become married to Vader in secret, whom she believed to be Anakin. Meanwhile, we switch back to Anakin in the future, in the body of Darth Vader, whose escape pod has landed on Coruscant. He managed to steer the escape pod to land in the midst of a scrap pile in the back of an industrial factory. Anakin poked his head cautiously outside of his escape pod and looked around. Anakin knew he should probably find some kind of cloak to cover his imposing black suit, to try to avoid looking too threatening as soon as he could. Thankfully, the all-black suit made it easier for him to sneak around, and he quickly snuck out of the factory and stayed hidden in the shadowy alleyways of the city streets of Coruscant as he moved around. He found a cloak and some garbage and used it to cover himself. He knew he wasn't anywhere near the Jedi Temple. So he found some cargo ships that headed in the general direction of where he knew the temple to be and hitched a ride in the back secretly to make his way there. To his shock and horror, he started to see stormtroopers in the streets more and more. Had they already tracked him down? But then he realized by how many there were and by the way they were moving and how little time had passed since he escaped the ship, that this was not very likely. They had probably been here for a while, and they were acting like some kind of militaristic police force. How did the cult get to Coruscant? And how much time had passed since Anakin had been under their brainwashed control? Soon Anakin would arrive near the Jedi Temple, but as it came into view, he could see that something was horribly wrong. It looked completely different. The only recognizable parts of the temple were the spires that reached into the sky. Banners covered the structure that once was the Jedi Temple, which had a symbol that Anakin had seen all over the city streets of Coruscant. Little did he know, this was the symbol of the Empire. And stormtroopers patrolled the outside of it like ants. Anakin's head started ringing with panic and confusion, and he fell to his knees. What happened to the galaxy? Did the Jedi get conquered by this cult? Or did the Jedi themselves transform into something completely unrecognizable? Anakin knew he had to take a closer look for himself. Switching back to Darth Vader, things were going exactly the way he wanted them to. The Clone Wars would soon begin, and Vader would train in secret frequently, getting more and more used to his body, and coming closer and closer to attaining his full potential in the dark side, which included gaining further mastery over conjuring Sith lightning. The Clone Wars would play out as usual, including meeting Ahsoka Tano and guiding her in the ways of the Force. For now, he would do nothing different with her than before, as there would be no need. However, there was one person from the era of the Clone Wars that Vader had different plans for this time around: Asajj Ventress. Throughout the chaos of the Clone Wars, there is one instance where Vader was on a solo mission and he managed to track Ventress down, using his foreknowledge on the events of the Clone Wars to aid him in doing so. Asajj Ventress was at a droid outpost on a planet for one of her missions from Dooku, meditating in her quarters. She didn't even sense when Vader had snuck into her quarters, for Vader had learned to mask his presence in the Force masterfully. "Ventress, great to see you again." Ventress quickly leaped to her feet with her crimson lightsabers ignited in hand. "Skywalker? How could you possibly know I'm here?" Her heart raced in adrenaline and shock. "Oh, I think you'll find I'm full of surprises, Ventress." Vader said with a smirk, leaning against a wall nonchalantly. Ventress quickly flung a container in the room at Vader with the Force while sprinting for the exit. But Vader unsheathed his lightsaber and sliced the container in half and moved to block the exit so quickly that Asajj stepped back a few inches in fear. Something felt different about this Jedi this time. She felt the dark side oozing from him deeper than she felt from her master Count Dooku, and it chilled her to the bone. Vader was now not trying to mask his power in the dark side at all. "Ventress, I just want to talk, that's all." Her fear quickly turned into rage as she did a retreating backflip to make some distance. She decided she would need to fight creatively and carved her sabers into the floor to carve out small metal circles, and would repeatedly fling the molten chunks of metal at Vader with the Force, who easily stopped their momentum and held them in the air with the Force. "Ah, very creative. I can see why Dooku trusts you with so many important assignments," Vader said slyly, before shotgunning the molten chunks at Ventress all at once. But Ventress anticipated this, and she leaped over the molten chunks while simultaneously throwing a lightsaber at Vader, thinking she could catch him off guard. But of course, Vader was too quick and simply held the saber in place in the air with the Force before it could hit him. But as soon as Ventress landed, she rolled forward and spun in the air, slashing her other lightsaber at Vader's side, trying to catch him off guard again as he held her saber in place in the air. But in that split second, Vader pulled out his lightsaber to block her attempted strike with his other hand, as he pulled Ventress's other saber from the air into his other hand and swung it down on Ventress, who managed to block it with her saber. Vader would then demonstrate his superior skills in Jar-Kai, which is the name for the dual lightsaber combat form, quickly overwhelming Ventress as he wielded his blue saber and her red saber against Ventress, who was forced to use only one lightsaber blade. And she had no choice but to jump back again before she was totally overwhelmed. Vader dropped Ventress's lightsaber at her feet. "There, now you have both lightsabers. Now, come at me with everything you have," Vader said. Ventress, panting slightly from how much energy she had exerted just to match his blades, screeched in furious humiliation and charged forward, incorporating the Ju-Yo lightsaber form into her style, which is a lightsaber form that excels by channeling one's dark emotions into an erratic, improvisational, but hard-hitting style,
which dark side wielders thrived at. She charged forward like a mad bull with both blades in an X formation, and when Vader held his blade up to block, Ventress ducked so quickly that even Vader was impressed, trying to slash at Vader's legs. But Vader had lost his legs once, and he obviously was not going to let that happen again. He jumped over her blades and over Ventress, and landed behind her, purposefully exposing his back to her. Ventress fell for the bait, and she turned with a ferocious swing of her blades aimed at his back, which Vader ducked under her blades while simultaneously launching a backwards kick up onto Ventress's chin. He purposely did not kick hard enough to deal any significant damage, but it was certainly enough to infuriate Ventress further. He turned to face her as she swung ferocious, almost animalistic swings, but he deflected each blow with little effort, and managed to parry one of her strikes and landed a gut punch on Ventress, which left her reeling for a split second before she once again backed up away from Vader. "Stop toying with me," she screamed, and Vader tossed his lightsaber on the ground, then spread his arms out in a welcoming gesture. "Fine then," he said with a smirk. Asajj, utterly enraged and done with being taunted so much, dashed forward with her sabers with such speed that most Force users would be unable to react to it. But obviously, Vader isn't most Force users. In a flash of brilliant blue light, Ventress found herself being held up in the air as lightning coursed through her body. As the lightning streamed from Vader's fingertips and Ventress floated in the air, she wasn't sure what felt more shocking: this lightning coursing through her body, or the realization that Skywalker had the knowledge of the Sith. Although it was only a few seconds, it felt like an eternity before Vader let Asajj drop to the floor. She slumped to the ground, totally drained of energy and in too much pain to be able to move. She looked up at Vader, knowing she was totally defenseless. Now that we've both had a chance to say hello, are you ready to talk?
Anakin snuck his way towards what was the Jedi Temple, which was now converted into an Imperial palace, unbeknownst to him. He had to see for himself what it looked like on the inside. The security of the white-armored cult soldiers was tight. It was very difficult for him, but most of the stormtroopers had never dealt with a trained Jedi, and even the Padawan Anakin had gone on many missions with Obi-Wan up to this point, and received much training, so he managed to sneak into the building. Just like the outside, the inside was almost unrecognizable. The ancient Jedi mosaics, the tapestries, the paintings, the statues, gone. Worst of all, there were no Jedi to be seen. No Jedi guards stood watch. No Padawans walked the halls. Anakin had to be certain. He headed for the Jedi Council room. It would take him a while for him to sneak his way there, it being in one of the high spires. He expected there to be higher security guarding it than any other place in the temple. But as he got closer, there were less and less guards patrolling, less and less lighting. To his dread, it felt like he was entering an abandoned building. Sure enough, when he opened the door to the Jedi Council room, it was empty, dark. Not just in the sense of there being little light, but in the sense that being in this room filled him with dread, like something horrible had happened here. Like this room wanted him to leave, like he wasn't welcome here. Anakin ran out of the room, his heart beating with dread and anxiety. He had to be thorough. He snuck and checked each of the main places where Jedi could be. Maybe the Jedi Council were all away on missions. He checked the training rooms. He checked the personal quarters where Jedi could be sleeping or meditating. He checked the room of everyone on the Jedi Council. If the rooms even existed anymore, they were either empty or converted into banquet halls or storage rooms. It was when he finally checked the empty room of his master, Obi-Wan, that he finally began to accept the reality of the situation and fell to the floor, overwhelmed with emotion, and began to weep uncontrollably. They were gone. All of them were gone. His friends, his family, were gone. We switched to their perspective of Vader. Ventress looked up at Vader, wheezing weakly after having been blasted with Sith lightning. "Talk. You want to talk," she said weakly. Vader squatted and smiled, nodding yes in response to her question. "That's all. I didn't choose this outcome, Ventress. You did. This pain you are in could have been avoided, but you can still choose the outcome of what happens next." Ventress looked up at Vader, still wheezing, and weakly said, You are no Jedi. It takes a true master of the dark side to do what you just did. I have only seen Dooku do that." Vader chuckled and stood up, and leaned against a wall with his arms folded. "Like I told you, Ventress, I am full of surprises." Ventress tried to move her body. She managed to sit up with great strain. "So you're a deceiver. Well, don't expect any praise from me. Just because you also embrace the dark side does not make you my ally." Vader nodded. "How right you are, Ventress. One's alignment with the Force does not determine whether they are friend or foe. In fact, you'll find that not even pledged allegiance is a guarantee of loyalty. I've come to warn you." Ventress narrowed her eyes. "Well, you've gone to all this trouble. I'm listening. Your master plans to betray you. Dooku, and the Sith master he serves, will soon start to see you as an unnecessary risk and a potential threat. They fear how powerful you can become. Soon, they will seek your life." Ventress shook her head in disbelief. "You think I will fall for such cheap tricks? How could you possibly know this? I'm not going to betray my master just because a deceiver tried to convince me to." Vader sighed. "You love jumping to conclusions almost as much as you love jumping away from your enemies. I'm not trying to convince you to do anything, Ventress. I'm just warning you. You can do what you wish with that warning. But I am quite fond of an old adage. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Or at least, they can be." Ventress simply narrowed her eyes at Vader. "Listen. When Dooku tries to dispose of you, I hope you'll be ready because you took my warning seriously. Then, I want you to know that you'll have someone you can ask for assistance, to help you get back on your feet, to make you more powerful. Powerful enough to crush Dooku, and with my help, even his master, Darth Sidious." Vader then placed a communicator in front of Ventress. "You can use this to contact me anytime. I'll only answer it when the situation allows it. To prove my loyalty, I'll feed you information that will help you succeed in your missions against the Republic." Ventress picked up the communicator and looked up at Vader. "And what makes you think I won't betray you the same way Dooku will supposedly try to betray me? The same way you're betraying the Jedi?" Vader smiled at her. "I don't, of course. Such is the way of the Sith. But considering how things went today, I'm not particularly concerned if that's what you choose. In addition to this, I am not just more powerful than you, Dooku, Sidious, and even the strongest of the Jedi. I'm also blessed with special knowledge and foresight that no one else has access to. Think it over. I'll be sending my first tip to you shortly." Vader started to head for the exit. "What do you mean, special knowledge? How do you have access to it?" Vader turned around, smirking. "You wouldn't believe me, even if I told you." Before starting to leave again. "You're a sly one, Skywalker. If that's even your real name."
You know that you can reveal your true nature to me, because if I tried to tell the Republic, they would think that I am the deceiver." Vader chuckled and nodded. "You catch on quick. You've always been so very clever, Ventress. I'm sure I'll be able to count on you." As Anakin wept, his hopes feeling utterly crushed, he suddenly realized that when he said that his family was gone, that isn't necessarily true. His mother is still around. He had to believe that. He didn't know how long he had been under control from that cult, but it couldn't have been for more than a few years. He had to believe this. He had to go to Tatooine and find his mother. Hope and purpose started to flood back into what was left of Anakin's body. Anakin got to his mechanical feet and decided he would make his way to Tatooine. He didn't know what happened to the Jedi, and he didn't know how to find them if they were still around. But seeing the state of Coruscant, he felt very worried that this could be affecting the state of the galaxy as a whole. And right now, the most important objective is to make sure his mother is okay. Anakin knew it would not be easy to leave Coruscant, as the white-armored cultist soldiers, which were actually the Imperial stormtroopers, were monitoring every flight path in sight. But this was Coruscant, and there was no shortage of shady figures willing to smuggle people for some quick credits. You just have to know where to look. After some searching, Anakin managed to find such a smuggler. Anakin didn't know what else to trade to the smuggler that would be worth enough credits besides his lightsaber. The lightsaber that the droids had equipped his suit when they were placing his suit on him was certainly not the same lightsaber he had before. It was when the smuggler demanded that he turn the lightsaber on to prove that it was the real deal that Anakin saw for the first time that his lightsaber was a crimson red blade. Anakin was utterly shocked. Only the Sith wielded red lightsabers. This couldn't mean... Was he brainwashed to become a Sith? Was Lord Vader a Sith Lord? Anakin couldn't allow himself to think about this. He couldn't allow himself to follow where this thought would lead. All he knew is that he would never willingly join the Sith. The Sith rely on their passion for their strength. They think inward, only about themselves. Anakin was, and always would be, a servant of the Force. His destiny, as the Chosen One, was to bring it into balance, not twist the Force selfishly towards his own desires, like the Sith do. This is what he told himself. The smuggler, upon not only seeing a real lightsaber but a crimson one, and seeing the very tall cloaked figure, who seemed to have an advanced suit and a deep, imposing mechanical voice, began to feel fearful for his life. And perhaps this mysterious cloaked figure before him knew how to use this lightsaber, and it would be his best interest, both monetarily as well as for his own safety, to agree to take him to Tatooine. He hid him underneath the floors of his cargo ship. That trick always works. When the Empire investigated the ship, they didn't bother checking beneath the floors, and off to Tatooine they went. Upon landing on Tatooine, Anakin would quickly find Watto, who was actually still around during the time of the Empire, and he would approach him and ask him where to find Shmi Skywalker. Watto was a bit intimidated by the tall cloaked man in the black suit that was asking him this question. His appearance and voice reminded Watto about the rumors he had heard about Darth Vader. But Watto was certain that Darth Vader would certainly not be talking to him. Watto was extremely shocked that someone was asking about Shmi, a slave he had not owned in decades. He didn't feel like giving away the information for free, but Anakin's temper quickly ran short. He knew he could not reveal his identity as Anakin Skywalker, not just because Watto probably wouldn't believe him, but that could also be dangerous. if the wrong people interrogated Watto for information, or Watto were to simply start a rumor. So instead, he resorted to threats. Anakin felt no guilt intimidating the dumpy, disgruntled Toyarian, considering he was the slave master, who claimed ownership over his mother and him, and was now attempting to hide the whereabouts of his mother from Anakin. Watto was getting too old for this and quickly gave in to Anakin's threats, and told him that he had sold Shmi to a moisture farmer named Klieg Lars, and that he heard that Klieg not only freed her, but married her too. But then, the added detail that was over 20 years ago was information that Anakin was not prepared for. Impossible. No. No, it couldn't be true. Nothing made sense. Nothing. How could he have been under some sort of brainwashed control for over 20 years and only now be breaking free? Maybe he had broken free of the brainwashing several times, and every time the cultists found him and wiped his memory. Not anymore. Not this time. He would find his mother. Then he would figure out what happened to the galaxy. And find the Jedi, if there were any left. Then he would do whatever it takes to stop this cult. He refused to become their puppet again. Watto told Anakin the whereabouts of Klieg Lars' residence, and Anakin offered to fix up some old machinery of Watto's in exchange for letting him borrow a speeder to get there. Watto was impressed by his technical engineering skills, and he began to wonder if perhaps this really was little Annie, all grown up. But that was impossible. He had already told Anakin the whereabouts of his mother over 20 years ago, and he heard that all the Jedi were hunted down. Anakin zoomed towards the Lars residence on his speeder, and little did he know, he was headed straight towards the home of his future son, Luke Skywalker. Also, little did Anakin know that the Lars residence was under the watchful eye of one Ben Kenobi. Darth Vader returned from his secret mission to recruit Asajj Ventress as his ally. In time, Dooku would indeed betray her and seek to end her, but this time she was more prepared than before, and escaped with even greater safety, thanks to Vader's warning. Vader had given Ventress several tips up to this point, to help her succeed in her missions, thus earning her trust more and more, and this time around she sought his help, rather than the Night Sisters. They would train together in secret, her power in the dark side growing substantially, as she was tutored by the most powerful Sith Lord to have ever lived, Darth Vader, unrestrained by his mutilated body, and free of much of the guilt and self-loathing he had before from having destroyed all that he loved. But that guilt and self-loathing were not entirely destroyed. Even though Vader now not only had Padme again, but his mother as well, he still remembered how in his original timeline he lost them, and he felt directly responsible for losing Padme. Thus, Vader still had that self-loathing eating away at him deep inside. And although hatred for others deepens one's power in the dark side, hatred for oneself does not. So, Vader was stronger than he ever had been. But he still had not realized his full potential as a Sith Lord, because letting go of his self-loathing was far easier said than done. So, he believed he was the strongest Sith, but he still wasn't entirely certain he could crush Sidious single-handedly, as easily as he would like. One day, Vader visited his mother, Shmi. He would frequently visit his mother, having managed to save her from the Tusken Raiders in this timeline, in her residence on Coruscant that he arranged for her, protected by the Republic. Darth Vader and Shmi sat down to talk. "Annie, I want you to know I am so proud of you. You are a hero, a Jedi who fights for peace. You've helped save so many, and you show no sign of stopping." Vader smiled and chuckled as he looked at his mother. "I know, Mother. You tell me how proud you are every time you see me," he said with a big grin. "Well, it's important that you know. But Anakin, I have been meaning to ask you about something." Her tone had that trademark motherly concern to it. "Yes, Mom? You know you can ask me anything." She smiled and looked up at him. "When are you going to settle down with Padme? I know that being a Jedi has been your dream for so long, and I am so happy that you have been able to fulfill that dream. But I'm even more happy that you found love." She sighed and looked down again. Vader was taken aback by this just a bit, but he wasn't entirely surprised. He expected his mother to have feelings like this. "I don't see why I can't have both, Mom. Being a Jedi, growing in the Force, helps me to protect Padme and keep her safe, and to keep you safe." Although Vader was partially lying when he called himself a Jedi, which he clearly wasn't, he was the most powerful Sith there ever was, at least in his mind. He wasn't lying about needing power. He needed the power of the dark side to keep Padme safe, to keep his mother safe. This is what he told himself. Shmi looked down again, smiling a bit shyly. I know, Annie. You have become an incredible warrior, and you have protected the both of us many times. But, well, being a Jedi puts you in great danger. I know that the Jedi wouldn't approve of your relationship with Padme, which is why you must keep it a secret. I'm not concerned with that. What I am concerned with is how every time you go out on one of your missions, you put your life in great danger. Padme needs you, and your children one day will need you. I know going out on adventures is fun, Anakin, but having a family, that is where true joy lies. I let you go to become a Jedi largely because I knew that as a slave, I couldn't give you the life you deserve to have. But if I wasn't a slave, if I could go back, I would do everything I could to be a part of your life as your mother. And now that I can be a part of your life, I am so grateful. Imagine how much better your adventures could be if you could go on them with your family, and if they were less life-threatening. Vader sighed with the ever so slight hint of frustration and looked away from his mother. Shmi placed a loving hand on his shoulder. I know that you have your own life, Anakin. Like I told you, when you decided to become a Jedi, I told you that the path before you was your choice alone to follow or not. I cannot control your fate, but I can give you my loving advice. You are already so powerful. You have become an incredible Jedi. You can continue your training and become stronger in the Force and more skilled with the lightsaber without the need of the Jedi. And you can teach your children to do the same. Plus, Padme has a good head on her shoulders, and she has the strategic mind of a queen, and is no stranger to using a blaster. If anything, she and your future children would be safer if you were not actively living the life of a Jedi. It puts a mark on you, and you know this. Shmi's words sunk deep into Vader's heart. She was one of the only people who could get under his skin like this. Deep down, Vader longed for what his mother described. How many times had Darth Vader looked back upon his mistakes, looked back upon that offer that Padme made when she came to him on Mustafar, to come away with her, leave everything behind, and raise their child in peace. How many times did he wish he took her up on that offer? He couldn't help but suddenly get caught up in the thought
of fantasizing about leaving everything behind and running away with Padme. Now was his chance. He had the opportunity now, through whatever miracle the second chance was. But then he knew Sidious would never allow that. Sidious would hunt him down to the ends of the galaxy. And even if Sidious would eventually be destroyed at Vader's hand, the galaxy is a dangerous and unpredictable place. The safest place for his family would be at the heart of Vader's empire he planned to build, surrounded and shielded by an endless army, headed by the dark Sith Lord, Emperor Vader, whose power in the dark side would grow daily, all to protect those he loves and bring order to the chaos. This was the rationalization he made, but Vader would not allow himself to fully acknowledge the truth, that this wasn't the only reason. In reality, the dark side was his drug. Power was his drug. Power, control, the respect and fear of others. Darth Vader was addicted to these things, and he did not want to let them go. His fear of loss only fueled and justified this addiction in his mind. Vader looked up at his mother with a gentle, reassuring smile. "I respect your wisdom, Mom. I assure you, I will take it into consideration. I just need you to know that I will do whatever it takes to keep you, Padme, and the children I will have one day safe." Shmi smiled back, but he could see the motherly concern shining through from behind her eyes as she looked at him. Vader lied about taking what she said into consideration, but not about doing whatever it takes to keep his family safe. Switching to Anakin, Ben would see a tall cloaked figure zooming rapidly towards the Lars residence, and his eyes widened as he saw the face, or rather the helmet, beneath the hood. No, this was his worst fears realized. Before Anakin could even get within view of the Lars residence, Ben would intercept the path of the speeder with his own humble hovercraft. Anakin, unsure of who the stranger was, thinking it may be his mother's new husband, slowed down just in case. Ben stepped out of his hovercraft and ignited his lightsaber with his hood still up. Anakin looked at the man in shock. Was Cliegg Lars a Jedi? Anakin raised his hands up in the air as he dismounted his speeder, then got to his knees. "I mean you no harm. I am unarmed," he said. Ben was shocked as the figure came closer and he heard the voice. He was certain that this was indeed Darth Vader. But what was even more shocking than this is the words that he said. Yes, Vader was deceptive, but this wasn't his style. Coming here alone, claiming to be unarmed, Ben did not buy it. "I don't know why you've come here, Darth, but there is nothing for you here. Nothing but your end. It's time I finish what I started all those years ago." Darth? Being called Darth more or less confirmed Anakin's suspicions. The cult not only had him under some sort of brainwashed control for decades, but they had forced him to become a Sith. For only the Sith had the title of Darth. And considering this Jedi stranger knew him as Darth, Lord Vader was indeed an infamous face of evil. No, please. You don't understand. I truly mean you no harm. Look, I am a Jedi, just like you. My name is Anakin Skywalker. I have been captured by the military force that I have come to hear is known as the Empire. It seems that I have been under some kind of brainwashed control by the Empire for decades.
and I have been forced to become someone I am not. Whoever you think I am, I'm not. I'm not whoever this Darth Vader person is. I know my story sounds unbelievable, but please, I just want to find my mother. I don't want to fight. Ben couldn't believe what he was hearing. Hearing Darth Vader describe himself as Anakin Skywalker and as a Jedi was truly unbelievable. Pretending to have forgotten about the death of his mother and the Empire, this was a new low. He didn't believe it. Ben suspected that somehow Vader became aware of his son Luke, and now he was putting on some kind of an act of amnesia as a ploy to get close to Luke, so he could try to turn him to the dark side. This is a new low, Darth, even for you. Don't think that I'm falling for this act. Anakin removed his cloak, revealing the suit of Darth Vader. Look, I'm unarmed. I have to wear this suit for my survival. I suffered some kind of accident. The longer Anakin looked at Ben, the more he started to feel this Jedi seemed very familiar. Wait. Obi-Wan. Master. Is that you? Anakin asked. Ben stayed where he was, with his lightsaber extended. Vader didn't exude any darkness. But neither did Darth Sidious, when he hid under their noses for all those years, until it was too late. But still, this was unbelievably uncharacteristic of Darth Vader. Obi-Wan Kenobi knew Darth Vader. He knew how when his apprentice and former friend Anakin Skywalker adopted this moniker, that it led to any of the redeeming qualities of the man he knew being totally swallowed up by Darth Vader. Not only did he become more machine than man, he became more monster than man, heartless and cruel. But Ben could sense a tremendous amount of innocence, confusion, and fear from Vader now. That isn't easily faked. In fact, he didn't believe Vader was capable of faking it. You're not going any further, Darth. I don't know what this is, but I'm not letting you go any further. You'll come with me. Anakin became more and more certain. Obi-Wan, it is you. Master, please help me. I don't know what's going on. I suddenly woke up in some terrible place. I barely escaped, but then I went to Coruscant and to the Jedi Temple, and it's been conquered by the Empire. And the Jedi are gone. I came here to check on my mother. Please, Master, you have to trust me. Please help me. You are my only hope. Ben couldn't help but feel a sharp pain of sadness and regret upon hearing these words. But he had to stay strong for Luke. He could not allow himself to immediately cave into believing this deception. Get in. I want you to blindfold yourself with that cloak. Don't test me, Darth. If you try anything, it won't end well for you. Anakin felt deeply saddened that his master would not trust him, but he understood why. How could he possibly know that he is indeed Anakin? He was just relieved to have encountered a familiar face, and even if Obi-Wan did not trust him, he trusted Obi-Wan. Now, he did not feel completely alone in this nightmare. Anakin complied with Obi-Wan's demands, and they made their way to Obi-Wan's cave hideout. Hey everyone, before you forget, please take a moment to like this video, comment, and subscribe. Doing so really helps this channel to grow and will help me to continue to put out high quality content like this, and also to improve and make even higher quality content than this in the future. Thank you so much for your support.